The One Piece card game currently has over 70 different leaders with a crazy variety of playstyles and power levels. It can be quite a lot if you're looking for a deck to start with, or maybe you just want an overview of the game's format and some fun recommendations. Either way, this video is for you. I'll be going over this game's meta, new player picks, and showing off some more rogue strategies. I've got a general breakdown of what these decks do, their average price, and specific deck list as well. Links are in the description. Let's start by explaining the game's colors, so you can get a feel of each deck's general playstyle. The color pie is split into 6 colors. There's overlap, but each color has its own playstyle that colors its specific decks. Red is the most aggressive color, having the most rush units and rested Dawn manipulation, but it also has some more nuanced themes based around power manipulation and event synergy. Green is the color of board spam and unit resting and unresting. Green can lock units into inactive and can rest an absurd amount of defensive units. Green also has a wide variety of other effects that really are just worse versions of every other color. Blue is the color of control. You have control options for limiting an opponent's hand size and board. It's non-KO removal, so it plays around defensive effects. Blue also has synergies with stacking life, playing units off top life, and drawing cards. Purple is the color of Dawn manipulation, ramping Dawn faster, or paying Dawn cards themselves as cost. Late game is now mid game, and anything goes if Dawn cards themselves are the cost. Yellow is the color of life manipulation. Healing? Sure. Aggro? Sure. Board spam? Also sure. Stun? I have that too. Anything is welcome in yellow, as long as it in some shape or form interacts with life as a mechanic. Black is the color of KO removal and trash recursion, meaning you can remove an opponent's units and play your own units back again from trash. It's also got protection from KO-based removal and can manipulate the cost of units on board, either defensively or offensively. Yellow and black tend to be the most expensive colors right now. Blue and green tend to be the cheapest. This is likely going to stay for a while, but it may change in the future, depending on how new sets release. By the way, my definitions of cheap are less than $100, very cheap means less than $50, average is less than $150, and expensive is more than $200. Prices fluctuate, so it might not be exact, but this should help you get a general feel for pricing. The current set of OP8 2 Legends presents us with 6 new leaders, most of which are very mixed in quality. But the new support released in the set is very impactful for most older decks, letting us see old favorites come back into the game like Red Purple Luffy, Roronoa Zoro, and Structure Deck 4 Kaido. While the meta itself remains similar to the previous format, minus a banned Law and a weakened Lucci, the upcoming starter decks in OP9 will bring dramatic changes to a ton of underpowered strategies, on top of some new ones we'll be seeing. So my new play recommendations for this set are taking those future changes into account. It's so if you want to, you can have a longer term deck with more room to pivot. But right now, the current best decks are Black Yellow Luffy, Rob Lucci, Jewlery Bonney, Enel, Gecko, and barely in the meta pool we have Blue Dolphy. A deck not being in the meta pool doesn't mean it's a bad deck at all. It's usually just not as popular and might be a bit weaker or take maybe more luck than meta decks. Now, here's my big list. Any deck in this playable section is able to win a local level tournament and even do well at a regional level event with a skilled enough player and deck list. Now, do note that that is a very wide range of power level. If you are interested in playing as competitive as possible, I really would recommend playing a meta deck. Well, in any case, it's strongly recommended you learn about what these decks do and how they work. You will likely see some of them in every level of tournament play. Without further ado, don't forget to subscribe for more One Piece content, and let's get into our individual deck lists. Black Yellow Luffy is, in my opinion, the best deck this format. However, with the caveat of acquiring a skilled player to bring out this deck's potential. What Luffy does is use child units to call out adult versions of themselves from life. This gives the leader an increased base power and free board value. Luffy's skill puts them into life, so if you do a combo right, you'd have 9k base power and 1 to 2 blockers that make your board immune from KO effects. This is crazy, and very flexible if you know how to do it. Plus it can be reset using 8-drop Gecko Moria, adding more fuel to the fire. The downside of this deck is you have to be at 0 life to activate Luffy's skill, so an opponent can just not attack you when they don't have to. To play this deck, you need to balance taking your own life cards with managing your hand size and an opponent's attacks. Get it right and an opponent can't do much, but get it wrong and you'll lose very quickly. I like this deck, but I can't recommend it to new players. But for experienced players from other card games, or those experienced with One Piece already, this is a good deck to pick up and put time into. That learning curve is well worth it. Black Yellow Luffy is a bit on the expensive side, needing 2 starter decks and black and yellow staples. Rob Lucci is a removal combo deck. Your leader skill both makes removal cards easier to use, but also sets up your graveyard for big recursion combos with Gecko Moria and Rebecca. The big play the deck does is use a single Gecko Moria to play 1 Rebecca, 1 Helmeppo, 1 Spandime, and 1 4-cost Rob Lucci. Do this enough times and you kinda just win games. Well, just make sure you don't die before then. This deck requires you to stack cost decreasing effects to constantly remove your opponent's board while developing your own and setting up your graveyard. It's quite strong and a much better recommendation for new players looking to be competitive. It does have some expensive cards, needing black staples. This deck does have some consistency issues as well, as some black matchups holding it back. If removal doesn't work, then it's not going to be a fun time. Jewlery Bonney is the only good green deck this format. Bonney as a deck does 2 things. First, the leader effect rests any one of our opponent's units or leader. This is a floodgate that an opponent has to go out of their way to play around. Second, this deck gets to play every green top-end unit, from Rush Hody, Stall Captain Kid, to 3-attack Zoro. You really do have the best counter to every type of situation. The downside is, your plays building up to that point could be a lot better, so it's going to take some skill to manage difficult situations. The deck has synergies with most green engines, but is mostly played with the Donquixote Pirates and, of course, its own supernovas. The deck is relatively expensive, needing both Cavendish and the very expensive green top end. Enel is a late game stall deck. Since Enel by default heals you 1 life, if you have 1 life, it leads to an opponent needing to use a minimum of 3 swings to kill you. This means you can safely go down to 1 life in the early game and get synergy from powerful cards such as Frankie, Kingdom Come, and Egghead Luffy. During late game, we then get to spam heals while building up a board. It's an oppressive value loop that can be very hard for an opponent to deal with if they're not careful. The rest of this deck is, for the most part, generic trigger units that remove an opponent's board or just stall. Enel's a great deck, but it does have some bad matchups and does depend on luck in some situations. That being said, it is really fun to play, especially if you like toxic gameplay. Enel is very expensive, needing 8 secret rares, every good generic yellow super rare, and depending on the build, some techs that add up in price. I would recommend Enel to a new player, but only on the caveat that money has to not matter to that new player, because it is one of the more expensive decks in the game. This is mostly why it doesn't directly make the new player recommendation list. Gecko Moria is a graveyard synergy combo deck. It's not as removal focused as Rob Lucci, and instead focuses more on pivoting between removal, value, and aggro, depending on the matchup. This deck gets to build board while swinging with leader. It can rip a card from hand, KO a stray unit, and search Gecko Moria from trash, all while having the same generic black options as Lucci. In the right hands, I think Gecko Moria is probably a stronger deck. That being said, it is a lot more skill intensive than Lucci. Gecko Moria is relatively expensive, needing some black staples, but I do think it's a great deck to pick up and play, even if it's not the newest thing. If you're not playing for meta, it's got a ton of interesting techs. In particular, I want to highlight the Shadow Asgard and Thriller Bark engine. It's a really fun combo to constantly set your leader to 7k base. I just wish it was a bit better for competitive play. In a weaker meta position at the moment, we have blue Donquixote Doflamingo. Doflamingo works by attempting to spam units to the board as fast and as cheaply as possible. Leader into Djembe into any other unit is really strong. Plus, by having so many cards that stack your deck and draw cards, you get the setup for the perfect counter into any opponent's deck. Blue removal is very strong. As of right this moment, the deck has 2 issues. First is consistency. There are only a limited number of ways to stack your deck, and a limited number of good Warlord units. Second, this deck has only an okay best case scenario. Other meta decks just do more right now. Both these issues get fixed with the release of an upcoming Doflamingo starter deck, which is so good, it makes Dofi very possibly the best deck in the game. So, right now it's an interesting proposition. Play what really is a weaker deck right now, but get so much better in just a little bit of time. I say if you like blue and don't plan on going to major tournaments immediately, it's pretty much worth it. The deck is fairly priced, and anything that's not fairly priced is getting reprints later on. Dofi is not great for new players at the moment, but it becomes close to a #1 pick with the new starter deck. For our new player picks, I've tried to include a wide variety of decks. I weighed 4 factors: availability, price, long-term viability with the new starter decks in OP9, and then ease to learn. Some decks score way higher in certain categories. Whitebeard, our first deck, scores very highly on ease to learn and synergy with new starter decks, since it is one of the featured leaders. Whitebeard is an aggressive rush deck with a 6k base 6 life red leader. By virtue of that alone, your opponent is on a clock the second the game starts. Most builds make use of powerful rush units like Kid and Killer, Zoro, and Rush Ace. If you see the nuts, you usually just win. The deck also gets great top-end alternatives like the classic 9-drop Whitebeard. It's a great strategy to pick up the game with. The issue comes from this deck inevitably going to no life with 8 to 10 cards in hand. It asks an opponent if they can break through this, and unfortunately, the best decks kind of can. It's no longer set 2 and 3. Good news is, this deck gets a ton of new options thanks to the upcoming starter deck, with new mid-game options that beef up the weaker parts of this strategy and keeps it relevant in the game. Plus, if you don't like that, you can pivot the deck around Marco Leader or Red Ace. You've got good options, and most of them trend on the cheaper side of the game. In a lot of players' eyes, Animal Zoro is the most fun new deck of this format. It's got the classic Zoro game plan of buffing small cheap units with leader skill, and rushing down an opponent. But now we have the addition of the Animal engine. Tony Chopper on play, and when attacking, lets us play an animal card from the top 5 cards of our deck. Another Chopper lets us play an animal from hand. And finally, we have a 1-cost counter event that lets us play an animal from the 5 cards in deck and set up during the opponent's turn for very little dawn cost. And we have a great variety of animals to choose from: rush, blockers, and even recursion. If that's not enough, we can finish our opponent with a Diablo Jambe or a Monkey D. Dragon. It's one of the best game plans Red Rush has ever had. It's cheap too, needing very few cards over $5, and most of the deck being commons and already reprinted cards. The downsides are that this deck can get unlucky, and it does have some rough matchups, so it's not a perfect pick for larger competitive events. Still a great recommendation for local events and for new players. Charlotte Katakuri is a yellow aggro deck that's based around abusing triggers and spamming the most obnoxious top end in the game, the Big Moms. This deck plays around 18 units that can play themselves from life, and even more stalling based triggers. It's designed to punish an opponent for attempting to progress the game state. Our leader not only swings for 7k each turn, but also lets us stack life. This pressure puts our opponent into automatically losing to our Big Mom top end. It should leave our opponent having to choose life when we play a 7-drop Big Mom's Choice effect. This deck is also very cheap, mostly needing rares and bulk supers. Plus, outside of a few key cards, it's highly customizable to what you have. There are 2 downsides though. First, this deck is notoriously very straightforward and easy to play. It's great for new players, but some players may get bored. I, for one, find it funny every time. The second issue comes from how this deck is vulnerable to a skilled player. Usually a good enough player won't lose against Katakuri, or at worst, it'll come down to luck. Which, to be fair, both these factors are massively stacked in your favor if you do it right. But it's not a guaranteed thing. Katakuri is also getting a new starter deck with some very powerful new support. It does a lot for this deck's best case scenario, and keeps it relevant. Overall, it's a fine recommendation. Kalgara takes the spot of the cheapest good deck in the game. Depending on your build, your most expensive card is less than $1. It's literally all commons and rares. It also helps that it's extremely fun. Kalgara is an aggro board spam deck that gets to play an extra unit each turn at the cost of taking 1 life. It's also got the secondary gimmick of getting to play the upper yard stage for free on top of other cards. The deck is mostly all units that search for other units. You have a heal, and you also have a vanilla. You get to move around so many cards. If it goes well, you flood the board with beefy 6 to 8k units, and an opponent just kind of dies. You have room for some really funny techs, but those can massively inflate the price of this deck. I would recommend Rush Ace though. Weakness-wise, this deck has consistency problems, somehow. Plus, any deck that can clear your board before it gets value usually can power through it. Still, Kalgara is a great deck this format. Vinsmoke Reiju is another great, mostly budget deck. This deck is about having small baby units tag out into bigger, more powerful units. Also, it draws like a lot of cards. The catch is you have to be low dawn. Luckily, the deck has tons of methods to cheat this and set up its plays. Porsche lets this deck search for an additional value and freely play a baby unit. Sanji plays himself for cheap, and Black Maria lets you immediately catch up to an opponent's dawn count. The main issue is that this deck needs to see repeated 2-ofs for its main babies and big units. If you don't see them on curve, you tend to lose. Even with all the draw power in the game, it's not a guaranteed thing. That being said, Reiju is one of the most interesting and unique purple decks in the game. It's more difficult to learn than some of the other recommendations, but it's a great pick if you want a solid, mostly affordable, fun purple deck. Red Purple Monkey D. Luffy is a late game top-end turbo deck. Early game is a bit weak, relying mostly on weak ramp units and our 6k base. But once we get to late game a turn or two early, we immediately start throwing out the best top-end in the game, from Heal Big Mom to Whitebeard to turn skip Luffy. We will throw out the most difficult options for an opponent to deal with. The 6k base, of course, is very strong, but the 3k life actually helps trigger a few powerful cards early, such as Ramp Zoro and Radical Beam. We also get to run the funny Diablo Jambe with turn skip Luffy and our 6k base leader. It's a very straightforward deck to understand, and it rewards a player for reading an opponent well. It is more on the expensive side, but I really quite like this deck. It gets a lot better going into OP9, benefiting from both the new Shanks support and the new Luffy support. Oh, and the new Whitebeard support also. Really, it's a very open deck to build. The point is, it's easy to learn, and has diverse options going into the future. Structure Deck 14 Monkey D. Luffy is a surprisingly solid deck for 2 reasons. First, the leader ability makes all of your units massively less vulnerable to removal, and second, the power level of generic black engines are insane. So it leads to this deck where you throw out massive, but surprisingly simple tempo plays that outtrade your opponent at every opportunity. On top of this, there's a ton of different engines and build styles that this deck could work with. The Navy and Dressrosa package are very solid, and are more popular at the moment. Here are those lists for reference. Links in the description, same as usual. However, I want to focus on the Animal Kingdom Pirate build. We get to abuse a searchable Jack for some massive value, and we get the really solid 2k counter of Who's Who. Top end wise, we get the blowout play of Kaido, who rips a card from the opponent's hand and KOs a unit. The whole engine is extremely fun, and synergizes very well with the rest of the deck. Structure Deck 14 Luffy is at its best when it's a counter to cost-based interaction decks like Lucci. So, for some environments and local metas, it's not recommended. Plus, even though it's a new player starter deck, it can be a bit expensive, needing black staples for any build. However, it's got a ton of room to experiment. It's very easy to pick up and learn, and very fun as well. So it makes my list of recommended new player picks, especially if you want to start playing from a current starter deck. The next section of decks is where I start recommending the most unique, fun, or personally interesting decks each format. They might be too expensive, too hard to play, or just not good enough for the first 2 categories. That being said, I do recommend each and every one of these decks. They're quite fun, and some of these almost are legitimately meta decks. Our first deck on this list is not a meta deck, however. Structure Deck 4 Kaido has one of the funniest interactions in the entire game. His leader skill lets you don -7 to deal damage to an opponent's life. Black Maria gives us up to 5 rested dawn each turn, and Onigashima gives us another rested dawn each turn. This means that if we pop off, we get to deal a free damage to our opponent each turn. And if we have our dawn batteries like Kid and Pudding, we can plus off it as well. The rest of this deck is running a lot of dated, but still decent options. 10-drop board wipe Kaido, X-Drake, and Rush Kaido are staples here. The few new options like Rush King are nice as well. The issue with this deck comes from consistency, needing to see staged in Black Maria as soon as possible. And if you don't, you're basically going to be playing a set 1 deck with no new top end, so it's rough. That being said, just for those games where you get to go off, it's an easy recommendation. Kyros is a very interesting deck, since it doesn't have much of a definitive style, outside of resting manipulation. The leader rests the 5 cost or lower if you control a Mink, and most of the Minks freeze enemy units. This is very good, mostly against rush decks, but very specifically against Black Yellow Luffy. For my particular build, I opted to make use of the funny interactions between Zo and the You Could Be My Samurai Wano engine. Zo lets us unrest a Mink each turn for free and gives us an extra Dawn each turn to play with. The You Could Be My Samurai engine lets us rest 2 units to draw 2 cards for 1 Dawn. Thus, with a bit of setup, we get to draw 2 free cards every turn. This nets us absurd draw power and puts our opponent into some really wacky situations. Just be sure to set up your own board before going off on the draws. The dumbest thing to do at stage is getting to drop the 2k Mink counter and use it as an extra Dawn printer each turn. So while your opponent would only have 10 Dawn, you'd have 12. We also have Rosinante blocker for absurdly consistent hand filtering, and we have 8-drop Rosinante for board swarming if we actually manage to get ahead. Other than that, it is honestly a weak leader. It's got consistency issues, some awful matchups, and all the problems of a green deck. That being said, it's extremely fun and very cheap. I do think a good player can get a lot of mileage from the jank plays that are here. If you like green decks, then this is a must pick up. Thus, I'm probably going to be doing a deck profile on this later on. Charlotte Pudding is a ramp turbo deck, opting to quickly hit 9 to 10 Dawn, then spam the board with a Big Mom each and every turn. It's quite strong and quite oppressive. If you like Katakuri, but just the late game parts, then this is for you. While the general core of the deck remains the same, there are a ton of different tech options to be used. The only thing you're required is to run the base ramp units and then the 8 Big Bombs. Pudding does lose to a lot of aggro decks, making it a risky call for this meta. But it's a playstyle that people love. Pudding is also weird price rise. It's not a cheap deck, but it doesn't have to be that expensive either. Honestly, I feel like this deck is somehow underexplored despite all the attention it gets. Kyros is less of a deck and more so a delivery mechanism for black and yellow staples. Sure, Kyros' leader skill is very demanding to set up. Sure, there's almost no synergy between yellow and black, and sure, Dressrosa cards don't work in this Dressrosa deck. But we get so much value from generic cards like Rebecca, Gecko Moria, and Rush Ace, we really don't have to care about those problems. You haven't lived until you used a Gecko Moria to revive a rested Kikunojo and an unrested Viola blocker. Plus, it helps that Hina and Ice Age do mean you get to KO a 4 and 5 cost or less unit for only 1 card of commitment thanks to leader skill. There's some legitimately good stuff here, on top of the generic meta engines. This deck is by far the most win more high roll deck I've ever built. When it works, your opponent doesn't get to play the game, and gets actively punished for trying to do so. But when Kyros doesn't work, you kinda just noodle around with half-finished setups. Also, this is by far the most expensive deck in this video. You not only use both yellows and blacks' best top-end staples, you also get to run weird expensive techs like Viola. If for some reason you do decide to play this deck, check out a deck profile I did on this deck for OP8 and OP7. It's quite fun. The new Marco leader is one of the most interesting potential-filled leaders in the game right now. It's got Whitebeard typing, deck stacking, card cycling, and power manipulation in a tight package. The downside is that the current power level of the options available in red and blue haven't quite caught up with what this deck should be, and being a slow 4-life leader hurts. Later on, this deck gets massively better thanks to a new starter deck, but also with new red support in OP9. But for now, you're gonna have to make the OP2 and OP3 support work. This deck has recurable blocker Marco, Rush Ace, and Edward Newgate. The interesting synergies come from stacking the top deck. 5-drop Portghast Ace lets us play a Whitebeard Pirates card from the top deck, and Sanji lets us play a 9-cost or lower unit from top deck. Be it a Rayleigh or a Whitebeard, it's actually crazy value. The deck also gets access to blue removal, which is solid. It's just a really fun deck to mess around with this format. Vegapunk is a 2-life leader with the gimmick of getting to either play or heal a 5-cost or lower ACAD card from hand each turn. This means you have almost complete control over what triggers are in your life, and you can do some wacky stuff with that. All the removal in the world, crazy strong draw power, stall, and even playing units from trash. And those are just the popular and good options. Late game, the deck gets to play generic yellow top end and heal more. It's just a massive grind fest for an opponent to deal with, especially since you can't attack and finish them off. Of course, not only is this deck super grindy, you have to put a lot of time into learning matchups. Well, unless you know what you're doing, most decent decks will find a way to kill you. So good luck. Kinemon is a land of Wano. Kinemon is a land of Wanos. Kinemon is a Land of Wano unit spam deck that gets to play a Land of Wano unit for 1 Dawn less each turn. This gives us the 2 brilliant plays of Okiku turn 1 going second, and Hiyori into Yamato turn 2 going first. Despite everything that's happened since set 2, this is still crazy. The deck also has Resting Yamato, KO Ryuma, and a non-effect 5 cost. That's actually everything unique and good this deck is allowed to have. You see, every new Land of Wano card is either printed in non-green, or just not a Land of Wano card. Kazuki Momonosuke blocker and a 5-cost red Izo both solved this deck's defensive problems, but they weren't printed in green just to spite me. Like, red isn't even a Wano color. The new Neko Mamushi, who would solve this deck's aggro problems and make the Hiyori engine not require running a vanilla, is just not a Wano card. He's wearing Wano clothes, he's a Wano character, he's even part of another Wano subtype, but he's not a Wano card. Oh yeah, also this deck doesn't work with the Otama 2K Searcher, because playing it actively turns off your leader's skill a turn early. I don't know why they do this, but I have to conclude this was done out of fear. They know what Kinemon is capable of, so don't sleep on this deck either. Bandai's design team clearly isn't. I run the generic green top end Dofi and Hody Jones. This covers both aggro and grind cases that the deck will get into. I don't run any blockers. If we get rushed, our opponent gets hit with that electric Luna. And if you need to force a board through removal, play Mihawk. Really, we're just trying to throw out as much nonsense at the opponent before they realize Kinemon is actually bad. Make tough plays, call out risky positions, and try to force out game early. If you're going to lose later, it's probably set in stone. But you do have a 20% chance you might win right now if you go all in. And this mindset has carried me through 7 sets. Man, this section has been less of a deck recommendation and more me complaining about Green Land of Wano. You should join me on the Kinemon experience. It's anime accurate. By the way, did you know that every Land of Wano leader is designed around fixing its terrible cards? Kinemon fixes how overcosted they are, Green Kazuki Odin and Green Yellow Yamato fix the deck's Dawn attach requirements, and Yellow Yamato and Green Red Odin fix Wano's complete lack of counter. Odin literally had the soft errata cards to have counter, and even then, most of them still aren't played in the deck. Thanks, Bandai. That's everything for this time around. It's a fun list of new decks this set, even if the meta is a bit stale. Definitely a calm before the storm type thing. You can really feel the upcoming new meta with how this video is structured. I'll probably be doing something to cover the new decks from the starter decks, like either a list for each of the new supported decks, or maybe do like specific decks that get to take advantage from them. It's a bit basic, I know, but I'm genuinely excited. Both my pet decks of Carrot and Red Purple Uda finally get something to finish the strategy. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more One Piece content like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.